Now, of course, today is Flag Day. The flag is always behind us and has been for as long as we have been in the man cave. Why? Because it is the symbol of modern Australia. Modern Australia that has many faces, many histories, but of course only one future. And people, I have been saying for some time, need to fly the Australian flag. Find a way to show it. If you can, buy a flagpole, put it out the front of your house. If not, find one way to put one on your porch. Find a way to put it in the window at the shop. If you own a pub, restaurant, cafe, do the same thing. It is not any other symbol other than how good is this joint. And it is the one that unifies us. From the sporting field to the United Nations, it is the symbol of our nation. There have been politicians that have done incredible things with the flag to show their love of the flag. Most notably of recent years, the wonderful Di Lee, of course, a refugee in her youth and now a member of Parliament, re-elected, by the way, no fluke, re-elected in one of the most multicultural parts of Australia. She is very proud of that flag. As is, of course, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. And you may well have just heard, if not, I am telling you now, that today her decision to wear the Australian flag while talking about the Australian flag in the Australian Parliament apparently was controversial. Now, other people are allowed to wear what they want to when they walk into the Parliament, most notably Lydia Thorpe, message stick and all. Oh, this is okay because it is cultural. It is culturally important. Of course, if you wear the Australian flag or drape yourself in anything of that culture, it's a problem. Here is Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price making her comments about the Australian flag in the Australian Parliament today.
My elders from a tiny community near Tennant Creek have spoken about how the Southern Cross is part of dreaming, or Jukurupa. So, contrary to the views of activists, Indigenous Australians certainly are represented by our national flag. There's the Union Jack, a reminder of our British heritage and the Christian ethos that forged a modern nation. And there's the 7-pointed Commonwealth or Federation Star, 6 points for our 6 states and a 7th point for our territories, a reminder of our unity. Together, these symbols remind us of our nation's history and the contributions of generations of Australians.
Good on her. The detail of the symbol, that's what matters. The sign of symbols that represent history, present and future. Oh, and did you hear the bit about the values that have come as a result of the modernisation of this country over the past 250-odd years? Oh, the heads were exploding. She also continued to talk about her love of flag and why love of country, love of flag is not a bad thing. In fact, it is something to be embraced by all communities.
Our national flag signifies our common citizenship and fellowship that makes strangers acquaintances. Our national flag is for times of celebration and times of commemoration. And as historian Geoffrey Blaney said, our national flag links the living and the dead.
My oath. Well, 7 minutes into the speech, a Green looked like they were slightly out of breath because they had clearly been sent to run into the Parliament and deliver a message of outrage. Now, if Nick McKim was there the whole time, I apologise, but he looked like 7 minutes in that he was rushing to make a point that if he might have been there, he would have made a little bit earlier. He used the processes of the Senate to complain about the wearing of the Australian flag in the Australian Parliament.
Senator McKim on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, President. I asked for a ruling, please, on whether the senator who's wrapped in the national flag at the moment is contravening the standing order that prevents props. And I do want to make the point that if it's okay for Senator Nampijinpa-Price to wrap herself in this flag, I would intend to wrap myself in a Palestinian flag.
All right, pal, here's the deal. They're not the same thing. It is not a prop when you are wearing what everyone in the chamber can see if they just look up. You see, anyone who as a school kid or as an adult has been to Parliament knows that that giant Australian flag, which can be seen from all points of Canberra, is visible from the two chambers of our Parliament. The Australian flag, I hate to break it to the Australian politician in the Australian Parliament, is different than the Palestinian or any other flag of any other nation. The idea that a national symbol would be referred to as a prop, but of course nothing is said when people wear something other than their suits to make important speeches in Parliament, including with, as has been recognised by the chair, the message stick. Now, again, I can't stand these people who hate the symbols of the country but want to sit in the Parliament that writes the laws that all of us must obey. The people who hate the modern country of which we live in, bemoan everyone else's problems but do very little about our own, who don't have the balls to get out of the way and let somebody else take the seat in the Parliament. Oh, no. The gravy train is always more important than the moral high horse that they like to step upon. Well, after a bit of back and forth, the senator had to remove the flag. Why? Because there's going to be an inquiry. The inquiry will take place amongst a series of senators to decide if the wearing of the Australian national flag in the Australian National Parliament is fit, proper and okay. Will they have the same conversation about the message stick and the animal skins? Well, of course not. That's cultural. Well, this symbol is the one that means just as much to so many millions of people around the country. And I don't want to see somebody wearing it in the Parliament all day, every day, but when the occasion fits, I have no problem with it. For her part, Senator Price was on Sky News this afternoon, speaking with Danica DiGiorgio, filling in for Chris Kenny a little bit earlier today about this nonsense.
This is the Greens for you. They care more about other countries than they do our own country. They're part of the reason why our country sees so much division right now. And you know what? I will stand up for Australia all the time. I love this country.
And we love you. Another politician who did exactly the same thing in the Parliament today is Senator Pauline Hanson. Now, remember, Senator Pauline Hanson has been re-elected to the federal parliament. She is part of our national life, and she too is standing up and blowing up at the mere suggestion that she too was being told, you must take the flag off because the Greens say so.
Of all days, it is our Australian Flag Day. For 124 years, since 1901, that flag has been flying, and yet on this special day, it was actually denied by the Greens, who stood up and said it should not be worn. It is not a prop. The Australian national flag is the enduring symbol of our nation, representing our history, values and unity, never a prop. And of course, it calls on the Senate to affirm the right of Australian senators to proudly wear the Australian flag in the Senate chamber.
Let's find out which way the Senate goes on all of this. Again, I don't want to see it all day, every day, but on appropriate occasions, why not? Why not? Drape yourself in the symbol that is the past, present and future of our country. Or is it everyone else's culture that matters, and Australian culture, of course, means nothing? Let's just pretend it's a blip on the radar. Nonsense. Now, we all remember the referendum of a couple of years ago. We all remember what the outcome of it was. Not just no, but hell no, all over the country. Oh, sorry, with the exceptions of couple of teal electorates and the ACT. We know what the result of all of that was, and we also remember that one of the reasons why people were so annoyed that the whole thing took place was because it apparently cost the best part of $500 billion to actually stage. I double-checked this afternoon. The Australian Electoral Commission has got up the cost of every by-election, every federal election, every referendum that we've ever had. The one a couple of years ago was $411 million. This was for a yes-no question. Well, believe it or not, the Prime Minister is openly talking about having another referendum, one that not many Australians are all that psyched about, and one that I'm not imagining is going to be automatically supported by the Australian people. He made that announcement today. The beginnings of a process which could lead to more politicians and longer terms in the Parliament. Currently, roughly 3 years, but it's not a fixed term, and we've got that whole willy won't he nonsense about elections that played out earlier this year. Instead, the Prime Minister, desperate to hold on to the power that he believes he will have for the rest of his life, wants it in bigger and longer chunks. In fact, he would like it to move to fixed 4-year terms. Now, of course, that would mean that the average politician would get to add an extra $200,000, or in his case, $600,000. It would mean we would go from 6-year terms for senators like Lydia Thorpe to potentially 8-year terms for people like Lydia Thorpe, who freshly re-elected, remember, ran away from the Greens, and we now have to still put up with her up until the next election when she claims she's not going to run. But I think we all know she'll probably find a way to keep on running. Here is the Prime Minister today talking about why Australia should change its constitution, have a referendum to guarantee politicians like himself can earn more money.
I support fixed 4-year terms, always have. Referendums are pretty hard to carry in this country, and opportunism kicks in. I made clear my government's position, but we support it. If people want to go out there and advocate and build support for it, that would be a sensible thing.
Now, part of the building support for it is an inquiry which is to be held by the federal parliament into the last federal election. There is a thing called a Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters. It's been around forever, and its job is to turn around and have a look at how to secure our democracy going into the next election. Now, in the last parliament, this was a multi-year process that resulted in, among other things, caps on spending at elections, in my view, slanted towards the Labor Party, because unions are independent organisations that can outspend anyone else on the political ballot apart from the Labor Party. At times, once you put them together, it can be 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 15 to 1. Spending limits on people like the Teals, but of course they were deferred for this election when there was a chance of a hung parliament. But now, with the dominance of the Albanese government, here comes the hammer, which is they would like to have an inquiry into having more federal politicians. The argument is that there are too many people in the country. Geez, I wonder who makes that choice, which now means that there are too few politicians to effectively represent the too many people that, by their own admission, politicians have to represent, particularly in the big cities. Now, all of this comes via a bloke called Don Farrell. Now, anyone who knows Australian politics knows this bloke is an absolute, the godfather, as they call him, of the Labor Party. But of course, he's the man who, as Special Minister of State, this is his full-time job, working out how to reform the system, to guarantee more taxpayer money goes to people like the Labor Party, who, if they have more votes in the opposition, end up with not just a permanent financial advantage, but then potentially, with a whole bunch of other changes that are being discussed, a Victorian Labor-like grip on power. Well, the news reporting today is that the current 150 members of the parliament needs to expand. Why? Because the ratio of politicians to population that the parliament also decides to continually increase is a reason to change. The inquiry will consider creating more electors to reflect population growth since the last time the parliament was expanded from 125 to 148. It's now, of course, at 150. A move the Albanese government and other Labor and coalition MPs are apparently open to in private. Geez, what a surprise. Everyone on the gravy train wants the gravy train to go longer and to be deeper, for the trough to go. It continues here with another little thing that the government, that remember, with its majority and as well as its combination with the Greens, can make dumb ideas law that quickly, and everyone else just has to look to the other side. What about this piece today? Unprecedented, weirdest stuff and concerns about Americanisation of the 2025 campaign are to be probed in a review. Now, we're going to have to read a bit here because you've got to follow on. One of the other people involved in this process is a bloke called Jerome Laxall. He is the re-elected and handsomely re-elected member of the seat of Bennelong. Concerning reports of aggression and intimidation allegedly experienced by voters and electoral workers have prompted a review of the 2025 election by the federal parliament, boosting security around polling places, and concerns about cashed-up, shadowy, hyper-partisan campaign groups are to be probed. And that's all code for Advance Australia. And they're fine when it's Climate 200, they're fine when it was Get Up. Oh, but because Advance Australia can land a blow, a line has been crossed by some campaigners in the May federal election, says that MP. Some of the weirdest and craziest stuff happened, stuff that I've never experienced before. We don't want the Americanisation of our democracy with hyper-partisanship and these incredibly well-funded third-party operators influencing our democracy. Well, what does he call a union? What does he call Climate 200? What does he call Get Up in the past? Now, all of this, again, this is like the way when they turn around and say, well, we're going to limit the amount of spending that anyone can do in a federal election because we want to stop Clive Palmer. Oh, but Holmes Accord, good billionaire, Palmer, bad billionaire. This is your democracy being debated, being discussed and being shredded before your very eyes. On top of that, and a little bit later in the show, we'll continue the conversation because, thankfully, there has been some noise about what we told you about last night. A plan to make it harder to get more information out of the federal government and to make it more expensive to even ask for freedom of information requests. We'll get to all of that in a moment or two's time. But first, the Leader of the Opposition, Susan Lee. She joins us now from Canberra. Susan, lovely to see you. Now, plenty to talk about here. I could waste the valuable time that I have talking about process, and it is important, the sort of stuff and fiddle that they're going to do in the next little while. But let's start with the obvious here, which is Daniel Andrews and, frankly, the Prime Minister playing a dead bat on a rather significant Australian standing amongst some of the worst world leaders we have known in the 21st century. What did you think about Daniel Andrews in China and the Prime Minister giving it a bit of a tick today?
Well, Paul, we want a respectful relationship with China, but that doesn't mean going to military parades with dictators and despots. It wasn't the sort of class photo that I think you want to hang on your wall, Daniel Andrews. And this really is quite serious when you consider someone of the status of a former Premier of Victoria standing just a couple of feet on the stage with Kim Jong-un, with Vladimir Putin, with the Iranian president and a series of other not-so-desirable world leaders. And the interesting thing, Paul, is that we asked the Prime Minister in question time, we gave him the opportunity to condemn the attendance of his close friend Daniel Andrews, and he skirted the question completely. In fact, he really got under my skin because he had the nerve to remind me that he and I were at a Victory in the Pacific Day, 80 years, in Martin Place recently, and effectively suggested that this was no different. And when you think on National Flag Day of our diggers who fought and died under that flag, for the victory in the Pacific that we commemorated in Sydney recently, and you make some comparison with what is going on in China, it is the Chinese Communist Party demonstrating military strength on a parade ground. Don't pretend that it's a trade fair or some other sort of happy occasion. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of and a lot of eagle-eyed people have been having a look at that parade, looking at plenty of the new technology, which obviously is about, looking forward, not about looking back to 80 years ago and the events that took place at the end of World War II. It was absolutely this show of strength. In fact, can we roll the tape? Because I think we do have that example of you going toe-to-toe with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister just pretending that the question didn't exist. In fact, I'll have that for you in a second. But when you talk about the flag, all right, can I also take you to where we were today and what I opened the program with, which was the situation involving your Senator, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, and the Senate is going to have a long conversation about whether the Australian flag in the Australian Parliament is a prop, because the Greens say, well, I'll show you, you do that, I'll bring the Palestinian flag in. How do the Greens not know the difference between the two symbols?
Because they're Greens, Paul, and they don't look at the world the way we do, and they appear not to have the patriotism towards our flag that we do. Of course, the Australian flag is welcome in all its forms in both chambers of the Australian Parliament. In fact, I remember recently, or maybe at the beginning of the last Parliament, a great colleague, she's an independent, but she's a great colleague, Dilene Fowler in Western Sydney, actually had a dress made of the Australian flag when she delivered her first speech, and that was welcomed certainly by me.
Yeah, she's gorgeous and it was a wonderful thing. All right, let's talk about the ISIS brides. Very interestingly, some reporting from my colleague Sharry Markson has added a little more detail to the questions that you were asking, and the reporting that was around this morning that, yes, there is another plan to bring another batch of people who left the country to become brides of the caliphate, whose, of course, partners were involved in some of the most vicious things we've heard about on the battlefield. But the Prime Minister is trying to pretend nothing to see here. The information that Sharry had about an hour ago came via a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry, which was a couple of very senior police officers in New South Wales openly discussing how things are being planned for the return, yet the Prime Minister pretended that the story and your question today was incorrect. What's the next stage in getting more information or holding the PM to account for clearly what he did today?
Well, great work by Sharry Markson on Sky tonight, breaking an important story which highlights how the Prime Minister... Look, if you're being kind, you say he skirted the question. If you're being a little bit more accurate, maybe he even misled the Parliament because he knew exactly what I was asking, Paul. Let's not forget what we're talking about here. These people left Australia willingly to join a death cult that has at its heart the destruction of Australia's way of life and our values and everything that we stand for. Again, I'm reminded this is National Flag Day, and I'm reminded of those values and what we stand for. And to think that this government could be aware and even making preparations for these individuals to come back and not give an honest answer in the National Parliament about what actually happens next. Do these individuals, as we suspect, have to be monitored for the rest of their days in Australia because of the threat that they might pose? Remember that ASIO is telling us that social disharmony is increasing and the threat of terrorism is rising to probable. And somebody coming back with this sort of history, have they changed their minds from when they left Australia, wanting to destroy our way of life? I'm not sure about that. But what I am sure about is that the Prime Minister didn't answer honest questions. I wanted to ask him a simple thing too. You know, will they be met on their return, and will they have proper terrorism threat assessments, and will they face arrest? Because what they committed in leaving Australia to join this death cult was indeed a crime.
Well, we know that other people have come back, and we know the model here. We also know that the people who lead at the local level, the mayors in many of these communities where they're going to go back to, openly say they don't want this to take place. So strengthen your hand, and we'll be paying attention to question time tomorrow. Now, on the subject of immigration, for obvious reasons, it continues in conversation. Yesterday, the government comes out and says we're keeping it exactly where we were 12 months before. We're locking in 185,000 this year, and, of course, into last year. Now, I pointed out that one of the frustrations that any person over the age of 30 may have with the sheer size of the Australian population is how dramatically it has changed. 30 years ago, 18 million people lived in the country. 30 years later, it's about 28 million. You go 30 years into the future, and the predictions, if we continue on a high number, starts to push us into the late 30s or the early 40s in terms of millions. Now, it is a nuanced argument. There are plenty of people who want to take the nuance out of the argument. I care not from where people come. We all care about what people bring to the country. But that, in part, is part of the frustration that is being had in and around this issue, which is that, yes, the country behaves differently than it did 30 years ago, but much of the infrastructure does not seem to be up to pace with where we are now, let alone where we'll be in 30 years.
That's right, Paul. And the number that was announced yesterday is too high. And by the way, it's too late in the year to actually demonstrate as a government that you've got you understand what you're doing here. This figure should have been relayed to the Australian people months ago. Instead, it's just a rollover of last year's figure. It doesn't come with any explanation of the planning, the infrastructure, the housing and the needs of Australians. So you have to get the balance right. And I'm not hearing anything from this government to prove or demonstrate that they have. Remember, in their first 2 years of government, they brought in close to 1 million migrants with no plan to house them. It's not about the migrants themselves. I'm a migrant to this country, incredibly grateful for the opportunity it gave me and my children for a better life and all of the things that I've been able to work hard for, just like so many migrants. The issue is, what is the government doing about making sure that young Australians have a pathway into their own home, that the infrastructure in our cities is not so congested that the amenity of actually living in our cities is being destroyed because it's not keeping pace. So it's time for an honest conversation, and it's time to include all Australians in that conversation.
Just finally, why does it take the collective power of everyone but Labor in the Parliament to get more places for people who would like to stay at home for as long as possible before they have to go to an aged care facility. Congratulations to yourself, your Shadow Minister, and the campaign that has been run since we learnt about some specific information about 200,000 people effectively either waiting for the wait list or even fewer of those people that are actually on a wait list. What does it say about the true priorities of a government that it takes the collective scream of everyone else to get basic access to care?
That's right, Paul. I'm very proud of my team and what we were able to achieve on behalf of those elderly Australians. When I sat there in Parliament and I heard the minister say, oh, it's just a short delay from July to November. If you're 97 years old and you're desperate for help and services and just want to feel safe in your own home, this is a generation that built this country, and they're being dismissed as if they can be some budget saving by this government. Because when Senator Ruston fought the fight along with the team in the Senate, they gave in and they acknowledged that they actually could deliver the beginning of these 87,000 places, actually 40,000 more by the end of the year. These are home care packages so that Australians can stay in their own home with the supports that they deserve and they need. And it just was shocking to see this government walk away from promises that they'd made, empty promises, to support elderly Australians and their aged care. So, yeah, very proud of my team. We're not going to stop here, Paul, by the way, because, yes, we've got 40,000 more home care packages between now and the end of the year, but that's not enough. And we've just found out that the waiting list is actually even bigger, 25,000 more people than we were informed of. So, you know, there's work to be done, and we'll keep doing it on behalf of the people that we're here for.
Well, thank you for doing it. Go get him. Susan Lee, lovely to talk to you. We'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
Susan Lee, of course, the opposition leader, the Alternative Prime Minister there in our Canberra studio.